Hey guys, this video will be on factoring trinomials. So recall that a trinomial is a polynomial with exactly 3 terms. We will discuss how to factor trinomials of the form ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are just real numbers. So some examples of trinomials in this form are the following. And to factor these trinomials, we will have to use the factoring by grouping technique. But in order to use this technique, we will first need 4 terms instead of 3. So let's consider the following trinomial. In order to rewrite this as a polynomial with 4 terms, we can break up 11x into 2 terms. There are many ways we can do this, like 10x plus 1x, 9x plus 2x, 8x plus 3x, 20x minus 9x, and a lot more. But in order to be able to factor by grouping and obtain a common binomial that can be factored out, we will need to choose the correct combination of 11x. But which one? So to find those 2 terms that we can rewrite 11x as, we need to do the following. First, we multiply the number in front of x squared, which is 3, by the last number, which is positive 6. This will give us 18. The next step would be to list out factors of 18. Those would be 1 times 18, 2 times 9, and 3 times 6. Now we want to see if any of these factors, when added or subtracted, will give us 11. So if we do 2 plus 9, that will give us 11. So it must be these 2 factors. Therefore, we can break up the 11x as 2x plus 9x, and now we have 4 terms, which means we can now use the factor by grouping method. So we split the expression into 2 groups, and the greatest common factor for the first group is x, and the greatest common factor for the second group is 3. So pull out the GCF from the first group, and we write what remains in parentheses, so 3x plus 2. Bring down the addition sign, and then factor out the GCF from the second group. We write down what remains in parentheses, which is also 3x plus 2. Now that we have this binomial in common, we can factor this out, and we write what remains next to it in parentheses. And we're done. Now we have factored the polynomial. Therefore, the factored form of 3x squared plus 11x plus 6 is 3x plus 2 times x plus 3. Again, we can always check to see if this is correct by multiplying it out to see if we obtain the original polynomial. So multiplying this out, we get 3x squared plus 9x plus 2x plus 6. Combine the like terms, and we get the original polynomial. Therefore, we have correctly factored the polynomial. Okay, so let's write down the steps we use to factor trinomials by grouping. The first step would always be to factor out the greatest common factor, if there is one, other than a GCF of 1. Once we do that, then if a trinomial is in the following form, we need to find 2 numbers whose product is a times c and whose sum is b. Then we write the middle term, bx, using those factors found in step 2. And finally, we factor by grouping. Let's try some examples using this method. The first step would be to factor out the greatest common factor of these 3 terms, if there is one. The GCF would actually just be 1, since that's the only common factor they share, so we can just skip the first step. Now notice that this is a trinomial of the form ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is equal to 8, b is equal to negative 14, and c is 5. So we need to find 2 numbers that multiply to a times c and adds to b. So a times c is 40, and we need to find two numbers that multiply to 40 and add to b, or in this case, negative 14. We can start with listing out different combinations of factors that will multiply to 40. So 1 times 40, 2 times 20, 4 times 10, and 5 times 8. It looks like the only combination of factors that may add up to negative 14 is 4 and 10, after we adjust the signs. So in order for it to add to negative 14, both 4 and 10 will have to be negative. So if we multiply negative 4 times negative 10, this gives us positive 40, so this works. And if we add negative 4 plus negative 10, this gives us negative 14, so this also works. We have now found the two numbers we need to use to break up the middle term, negative 14x. So we write negative 14x using the factors found, negative 4 and negative 10. So we can rewrite this trinomial as 8x squared minus 4x minus 10x plus 5. Now we have four terms, and we can now factor by grouping. So we split the polynomial into two groups, and the greatest common factor for the first group is 4x, and the greatest common factor for the second group is 5. So factor out the 4x from the first group, and we have 2x minus 1 left in parentheses. Bring down the minus sign, and factor out the 5 from the second group. Again, we need to be careful, because now we are actually factoring out a negative 5 from this group. So we will have to adjust the signs accordingly. So we will have positive 2x minus 1 left in parentheses. If you're unsure whether you factored out the GCF correctly from each group, you can always check by multiplying. So if we distribute the minus 5 to the 2x, we get minus 10x, and distribute the minus 5 to the negative 1, we get plus 5. Which is what we had originally, so we've done this correctly. Okay, so now that we have this binomial in common, we can factor this out and write what remains next to it in parentheses. And now our polynomial is factored. Let's try another example where we have to first factor out the GCF. So for this trinomial, notice how the three terms have a GCF of 2. The first step would be to factor this out. So we factor out the 2, and we have 3x squared minus 1x minus 10 left in parentheses. Now we have to factor this trinomial out by using our factor by grouping method. So first we multiply 3 times negative 10, which is negative 30, and now we have to find two numbers that multiply to negative 30 and add to negative 1. So we list out the factors of negative 30, and it looks like this combination might add to negative 1. We just need to adjust the signs. So we adjust it to positive 5 and negative 6. Now if we multiply this, it gives us negative 30. And if we add this, this gives us negative 1. Therefore, these are the two numbers that we will use to break up the middle term, negative 1x. So we can rewrite the inside as 3x squared minus 6x plus 5x minus 10. Now we can factor by grouping. We split this polynomial into two groups, and we factor out the GCF from each group. Then we can factor out the common binomial x minus 2. And just remember to write the 2 that was factored out in the first step. And now we have factored out the trinomial. Okay, let's try another example. We want to factor the following trinomial. First, we check to see if the terms have a GCF that can be factored out. These terms have a GCF of 3x squared, therefore we factor this out first. However, notice that the first term inside the parentheses is negative, So let's instead factor out a negative 3x squared to fix this. Now we can factor this trinomial by using the factor by grouping method. So first we multiply 6 and negative 20, which is negative 120. Now we have to find two numbers that multiply to negative 120 and add to positive 7. So we can list some combinations of factors for negative 120. For now, we'll just ignore the negative sign and adjust it once we find the right combination. So it looks like 8 and 15 can add to positive 7 if we adjust the signs as negative 8 and positive 15. So if we multiply negative 8 times 15, we get negative 120. And if we add negative 8 plus 15, we get positive 7. Therefore, these are the correct numbers that we will use to break up 7x. So now we write our trinomial as 6x squared minus 8x plus 15x minus 20. Now we can split the polynomial into two groups and factor out the greatest common factor from each group. We factor out the 2x in the first group, and we have 3x minus 4 left. Bring down the plus sign, and we factor out 5 from the second group, and we also have 3x minus 4 left. Now factor out the common binomial, and we have 2x plus 5 left. And don't forget to write the negative 3x squared that we factored out in the beginning. And now we have finished factoring the polynomial. So there's actually a shortcut that we use to factor a trinomial of the form ax squared plus bx plus c if a is 1. So for example, if we have x squared plus 7x plus 10, the coefficient of x squared is 1. But first, let's factor this using the factor by grouping method. First, we multiply 1 times 10, which is 10. And now we have to find two numbers that multiply to 10 and add to 7. So we list out factors of 10, and it looks like 2 times 5 will be the correct combination. So we break up the middle term, 7x, with these two numbers. Then we split the polynomial into two groups and factor out the GCF from each group. And our factored form of the polynomial is x plus 2 times x plus 5. However, notice that the same numbers, plus 2 and plus 5, appear in our final factored form. Therefore, to factor a trinomial of the form x squared plus bx plus c, again, when the coefficient of x squared is 1, we can set up our two parentheses with the variable written first, and then in these boxes, we place the two numbers that multiplies to c and adds to b. So let's try an example where we can use this shortcut. We want to factor the following polynomial. So we could factor this by using the factor by grouping method and rewriting this as 4 terms. But since the coefficient of x squared is 1, we can use the shortcut approach. We begin by writing the first terms of the binomial factors like this. Next, we look for two numbers that will multiply to 35 and add to negative 12. So we list out factors of 35, and it looks like 5 times 7 can add to negative 12 after we adjust the signs. So in order for the numbers to add to negative 12 and multiply to positive 35, we will have to make both of the numbers negative. So negative 5 times negative 7 gives us positive 35, and negative 5 plus negative 7 gives us negative 12. So these are going to be the numbers that we use. We place these numbers here, and we can rewrite the binomials as x minus 5 times x minus 7. And now we have factored the trinomial. Let's try one more example. We want to factor the following trinomial, and since the coefficient of x squared is 1, we can use the shortcut. So we write the first term of our binomial factors, and now we want to find two numbers that multiply to -42 and add to -1. For now, when listing the factors, let's just ignore the negative sign, but adjust the signs after we find the correct pair. Okay, so it looks like the correct pair will be 6 and 7 if we make the 7 a negative. So if we multiply 6 times -7, this will give us -42. And if we multiply 6 plus -7, this will give us -1. Therefore, these are the correct numbers. So our trinomial factors to x plus 6 times x plus -7, which is the same as x plus 6 times x minus 7.